All right, the big elections. And I've read your thread about Kamala Harris and her connects with very shady characters with regards to India, Pakistan, and all of the Indian subcontinent. And it was very interesting to see the sort of well, lobbying, but also the kind of influence operations that go on in Washington, D.C. So I'd really like you to discuss for our audience what you've mentioned and how dangerous do you think that is from a geopolitical standpoint?
Yeah, so what's very interesting about this Kamala Harris who's running for president is the fact that she has this long history of being associated with a plethora of varying anti-India lobbies. And this has been well documented for a very long time. The Squad has an affiliation with her. A Squad, as you guys probably know, your audience knows, there are a number of Democrat backbenchers in the U.S. House of Representatives, like Ilhan Omar, AOC, Rashida Tlaib, who have long criticized Prime Minister Modi, the Indian government, and what we know as Hindutva. And it's very interesting that this is what Kamala is associated to and with. What is very striking, however, is what I found in my research. And there's a gentleman called Dr. Asif Mahmood, who is a commissioner on the USCIRF, which is an organization that is a part of the U.S. State Department that tracks human rights issues all around the world. And what's fascinating about this Dr. Asif Mahmood is that he has a very particular anti-India bend to him. And he's got a very specific agenda, which is to denigrate the government of India and to also, make the Indians look pretty bad. And he does a pretty, interesting job, a good job, you could say, with the way he puts this together. And I always wondered about this gentleman, like, why is he so zealous? Why is he such a fanatic? Why is he so obsessed with, for example, the Kashmir conflict? What is his deal? If we were to be very reductivist and just outright bigoted, we could say, oh, he's Pakistani, that's why he hates India or dislikes the Indian government, I should clarify. But that would be very, very unfair and disrespectful. What I discovered was that in 2019, 2020 edition of the Pakistani Consulate of Los Angeles, Dr. Asif Mahmood actually is mentioned there as a person that is talking about how Kamala Harris has been very instrumental in advocating for the rights of Kashmiris, and she takes a stance that is in lockstep with the Pakistani government, which has been that India is oppressive in Kashmir and that they should have autonomy or independence, or they should join Pakistan. And that was a little bit odd. Like, why did the Pakistani government feature this Dr. Asif Mahmood? Then you do a little bit more digging. So there's an article by GeoTV, which is a prominent Pakistani news organization. In there, they talk about how Dr. Asif Mahmood is connected to the major parties of Pakistan. He was connected to the Prime Minister of Pakistan. Guy is very, very influential, very connected. Okay, so then what does this have to do with Kamala Harris? Well, there's a very famous video where Kamala Harris praises Dr. Asif Mahmood, thanks him for being one of her first supporters, goes on about how Mahmood has done a lot of work for her in bringing her to more mainstream political circles and has contributed to her and so on and so forth. And then you start looking at the financials, right? You look at the FEC records and you see all the donations. There's thousands and thousands of dollars given to Kamala by this doctor. You then start to also look into the fact that he has fundraised for Kamala Harris in his house many times. he's fundraised for his sister, her sister, Maya Harris. Maya Harris was a policy advisor for Hillary Clinton in her election campaign and is a longtime Clinton associate. And then you start to see that there's this nexus with the Pakistani government, Dr. Asif Mahmood, Kamala Harris, and then there's this video, September 2019, Houston, Texas. Kamala Harris is asked a question about the ongoing human rights situation in Indian Kashmir. Kamala Harris is asked, what she would do, and she was a U.S. senator at the time, and then she talked about if she were president, what she'd do. But it's very interesting her choice of words. What she said, she talked about how as commander-in-chief she would intervene in the region, and the words were used very explicitly: commander-in-chief, signaling military authority, and intervene in the same sentence, which is significant because what can you conclude other than the fact that when someone is, and I'll land my plane here, but when someone is talking about a commander-in-chief, that is the leader of the military, okay? That is the supreme leader of the armed forces, right, of the United States. With that term, plus intervene, it's very clear that Kamala Harris subscribes to this ideology of R2P, right to protect. And she believes in using military force to enforce human rights laws, standards, and so on and so forth. And she believes India is an abuser, which she also said in that same clip, September 2019. It's very shocking. Has not gotten any coverage by the U.S. media whatsoever. Very disturbing. And she's never renounced her words, never taken them back.
Well, that is quite interesting, honestly. And let's talk about the Indo-Americans that reside in the US, in Americans of Indian heritage, as well as, them being Hindu. And you've been working on the ground with a lot of these people, and your hat advertises the side that you're on. So how has your experience been with them? Are they aware of these issues that are in the Democrat camp? Because this is their presidential candidate, right? It's not someone who is just there for a ceremonial title or something. This is someone who will have clear effects on geopolitical strategy that the US pursues next term. So that is likely to have an impact, of course, if she comes to power. So what has been your experience with regards to the Hindus on the ground?
Yeah. Before I answer that question, I also just want to add one more point. So in that video from 2019, behind her is Dr. Asif Mahmood standing around the stage, watching her. It's very interesting. And I hope you can show that video to your viewers. They need to see this thing. Now, in regards to the actual electorate, so most Indian Americans, Hindu Americans, are not thinking about foreign policy. Their number one issue is the economy. They're concerned about, the cost of living, standard of living. They see that things are more expensive. It's very difficult to get a house. Mortgage prices are high. Inflation is an ongoing problem. They're having concerns about getting, access to healthcare, quality healthcare. There are concerns about, where people are going to be living. And, there's this constant, shift going on with, these urban centers where the Indians predominantly live and how they're going to deal with this ongoing problem of costs going up. Then there's also this issue of crime, which is a big problem. In America, we have the Second Amendment, where people have the right to defend themselves and use a firearm. And it's interesting that in this country, there are liberal district attorneys that will actually prosecute people who take up arms in self-defense. And Why is that significant? Well, it's significant because a number of Asian Americans that run the 7-Elevens, that run the various hotels. So I'm thinking about, a lot of the Gujarati community that runs the hotels. They have been victims of crime. I know of Indians, specifically, people in the Telugu, people from Telangana who run some of the 7-Elevens. And I've gotten to know them in the state of Georgia and North Carolina, which are two battleground states. I'm being told that, they exercised their rights to self-defense. They went through. They themselves were charged for defending themselves because they were perceived to be using excess force, too much force, and so there's this chilling effect where people don't want to exercise their Second Amendment rights, and the Democrats could care less about these Indian Americans who are facing these problems of crime, and then. One thing that I always talk about when we're having a prolonged discussion on these issues is what's going on with illegal migration, right? Illegal migration is a big problem in America, just like it is for India, where you've got this problem with Bangladesh and India, and migrants pouring in who are not vetted. So the same thing is occurring on America's southern border with Mexico, where you've got these influx of foreigners coming in. Some of them have not been properly vetted. There are many instances of folks coming in with fake IDs, and then as a consequence, they've got a criminal record back home. They have a natural tendency in committing crime, and we've seen a lot of victims from this crime. And Indian Americans are concerned about that, and the Democrats could care less. And Kamala Harris, in particular, is talking about an amnesty plan, which would help illegal immigrants, get into some sort of normalization program where they would become, more stable with their immigration status, and then eventually citizens. And Indian Americans are by far one of the least, crime. They're one of the least amount of groups that they're very low. They have like very low amounts of crime, essentially. And they're very law abiding. And they look at how these illegals have been able to get into the system, get taken care of, do well. And the immigrants themselves had to go through the process, and they followed the process. They paid the fees. They did all the vetting. And it's just this unfairness. It's just wrong. And they're just not exactly a fan of what Kamala Harris is talking about here. So many issues like this is recurring on the trail, and we see that foreign policy tends to be a concern of the very strong, I would say, upper classes of American society, who are now looking more at their investments and their portfolios and stocks, and there's concerns about market volatility. But it should be something to talk about. I mean, it is a concern.
Right, so you do see a lot of awareness in Indian Americans about this.
About which issue?
About all these issues, about the right to bear arms, and about protecting themselves about the illegal immigration.
Absolutely, it is an issue that is discussed on the dinner table, and then there's also the fact that people are concerned about, what kind of commander-in-chief they would have, and what it would mean for their children. Are they going to be, in any positions of being in conflict? Are they going to have to get involved? It's something that comes off in passing. But again, it's more like, what are the issues on the economy that affects the average person, the ordinary person? Kamala Harris has talked about price controls for groceries. People have told me, they experience Nehru Gandhi price controls, and it only ended up creating this crazy black market where criminals ended up, selling goods and such. Because with price controls, there'd be less of a profit margin for these goods.
Right.
And so what would happen is they would these items would just either not be sold much or as much. There'd be shortages as a consequence, and in the black market, there'd be sales of these goods there. So people look at this proposal that Kamala Harris has, and they're very skeptical of it. So these are like very bread and butter issues that people talk about on a regular basis. And we've got a thing called Obamacare, where in America, you have this right to get private insurance, and there's a marketplace of competing private insurers, and they're all competing with each other, and the government helps facilitate this process. And some states have subsidies, right? Some states have varying programs that complement these programs. Kamala Harris hasn't really gone into detail on how she's going to fix this healthcare system and how she's going to bring down the costs of insurance premiums, how she's going to give more choice. And so, there's just a lot of skepticism that if Kamala Harris will make things better. They've experienced what Biden has done, and not exactly very, very satisfied, not very hot about this. The issue that I raised in the beginning of our discussion, it should matter, because this doctor, he is a dual citizen of America and Pakistan. He has that mentioned by the Pakistani consulate. It's been reported that he's close to these political parties. He has influenced Kamala Harris on this issue of Kashmir, and given that comment that Kamala made, one could reason that perhaps he has influenced her. And we see all those donations. We see also that...
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just going through that video on Geo News that you mentioned, and we can see them together.
Yeah, go ahead. Put it on.
कि डॉक्टर आसिफ मुलाजमत पेशा तबके के लिए इक़दाम करने के लिए पुरअज़्म है। डॉक्टर आसिफ माहौलियाती बहरान से निमटने और हेल्थ केयर अखराजात में कमी के लिए हर मुमकिन इक़दाम करना चाहते हैं। उन्होंने डॉक्टर आसिफ महमूद पर एतमाद का इजहार किया कि कांग्रेस रुकन बनकर भी डॉक्टर आसिफ इन इक़दार को अजीज तर रखेंगे। डॉक्टर आसिफ महमूद कैलिफोर्निया के डिस्ट्रिक्ट 40 से कांग्रेस का इलेक्शन लड़ रहे हैं। 8 नवंबर को होने वाले मिड टर्म इलेक्शन में डॉक्टर आसिफ का रिपब्लिकन यंग किम से मुकाबला है। इस हलके की अहमियत यह है कि डॉक्टर आसिफ ने प्राइमरी में मौजूदा रुकन कांग्रेस यंग किम से भी ज्यादा वोट लिए हैं, और ये डिस्ट्रिक्ट उन चंद हलकों में से एक बन गया जहां रिपब्लिकन अपनी नशिस्त खो सकते हैं।
Yeah, so that was him. He ran for Congress. But what I would suggest for your viewers is to play the video that where Kamala said these comments.
Yeah, so I'll look for it, and I'll link it in the description box as well. And viewers to make a point to go through that.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, sure. I was going to suggest it's on my X. If you just go on my profile, you'll search it. You can find it.
I did try that actually, and I could not find that video. I couldn't even find the thread that I liked.
Then the other one,
I deleted it.
I would also suggest you then to go to my website, and you'll find it there. So HindusForAmericaFirst.com. It's linked right there. And if you scroll down through the text, you'll see where in 2019 she made these remarks. You'll see the link there. It'll connect to my X, and you'll be able to put it on.
Okay, let's try going to your website. HindusForAmericaFirst.com. Here, yep. Just let me present my screen. So, all right. Do you want to actually explain your PAC?
Sure.
Because the Indian audience may just not be familiar with it.
Yeah, so basically our group is a PAC, which is a political action committee And so what that is it's basically an election vehicle that advocates for issues. And so instead of a candidate running for office, it's basically an organization that is essentially involved in the political process, advocating for issues. And so they can support a candidate or go against a candidate, and they're funded. They are utilized in pushing issues, and they are an advocacy organization in a nutshell, and they're a political one. And so our group endorsed Trump and the Republican Party, and we're trying to get Hindus to consider these issues in America and go forth from there. And we've been having a lot of success in our work and activities. So if you scroll up, you'll see 2019. You'll see the comment that says, in 2019, Kamala Harris talked about intervening. Or you can hit Control F. Yeah, and then you'll see that link right there. Should be the first link.
Yeah. Let's listen to the video.
Yeah, right there.
Often round-the-clock curfews, thousands of detentions, total blockout on information and communications. I personally and my other Kashmiri friends have not been able to speak with our parents, brothers, sisters, other important family members. For the past 5 weeks now, my question is that in view of the severe human rights abuses, enforced disappearances, violence against women and children, which includes pellet gun injuries and abductions, what kind of message of hope and support would you send to the Kashmiri people? That's one part. And secondly, what kind of role do you see for the United States in addressing this humanitarian crisis? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, as to the first piece, it is about reminding people that they are not alone and that we are all watching. Because so often when we see human rights abuses, whether they be in this country or around the world, the abuser will convince those that they abuse that nobody cares and that nobody's watching and that nobody's paying attention.
Can you pause for a second?
Which is a tool of an abuser. And so that is part of...
Yeah.
So I just want to pause for the audience here. So she's asked a question by an individual who's concerned about what was going on in Kashmir, and this was in 2019. This was around the time Article 370 was more or less abrogated. And she was concerned about the internet lockdowns, the shutdowns that was going on in India, internet restrictions and whatnot. And Kamala Harris comes out and basically compares India to an abuser, right? Because she talks about abusers being able to do what the heck they want and knowing that they won't get caught or face any repercussions. So it's very interesting because anybody that is Indian origin in America that is listening to this needs to understand something very, very clearly. As they consider this candidate, Kamala Harris, and they think about her being of Indian origin, understand that this lady has insulted your motherland's country. And it's important that I bring this up because poll after poll has said, like in Pew Research, that Indian Americans have very high favorable ratings of India. Something like 80-90% of Indian Americans have that high rating of India. And this woman, Kamala Harris, isn't talking about just the government of India, but she's basically talking about all India, and is comparing them to an abuser. And it's just very striking to me because I just don't see how this person really would make Indo-US relations any better. There was a poll done, I believe, by APIA, which is a premier Asian American polling tracking company that looks at the attitudes of Asian American voters. And they asked Indian Americans what they think on this issue of Indo-US relations, who would be a better candidate. And in the September 2024 polling, they said 50% of respondents believe that Indian Americans think Kamala Harris would be better, and something like a third said Trump would be better. And so the point here is you've got this candidate, Kamala Harris, already looking at India in a very negative light and comparing it to an abuser. And behind her is our colleague and friend, Dr. Asif Mahmood, watching her. It's very, very strange. Just look at his body language. Just look at how he's like reading this. Anyway, continue.
I do want to point out something for, I think that I have mentioned this in my articles as well and on the channel. I do believe that a lot of the American media that covers these events caters to an audience that is completely unaware of ground realities and a broader geopolitical picture, for the simple reason that India and Pakistan are hostile nations. This is like talking about Greece and Turkey, because people might understand whiter nations better, I don't know. But, when one talks about two hostile nations, you have a plant posing as a reporter from one hostile nation, and then the to-be commander-in-chief actually sides with their version of a story without asking for any facts. It should then normally, for any educated audience or the media covering such an event, be obvious that this is not a serious discussion. This is outlining of a plan of action. Or catering to donors and stating what possible action would happen if they were to ever have that kind of power. And so I think this is this reflects very poorly on the media, on the mainstream media in the US. Also, I think there needs to be a lot more accountability that they should be held to, and because they just cannot transcribe everything that goes on. There has to be an element of research and investigation before putting these things that, okay, this is a Pakistani point of view, let's talk about an Indian one. But all right, let's go through this video, and I do want to bring up her Indian origin, because what we've seen is that every other person, politician, whether they're of Chinese origin, whether they're of Turkish origin, whether they're of Pakistani origin, actually hold on to their roots, whereas Indian ones are expected to be of communist origin, naturally Indian at all. It's a globalist religion, and
yeah, certainly. And I just want this. I just want to make this video, though. I want to contextualize it as much as possible with you for the audience, because the audience, in my opinion, should be American, because these are the voters that I'm talking to on a regular basis. And so what I want to make it clear here is, like, I personally am not advocating for India. I'm simply advocating that you got this person who's of Indian origin, who is an American, that is running for office, seems to have a very slanted point of view on this conflict that doesn't involve America at all. It has no bearing on America in terms of what it has to do. Just want to put it out there. So at the conclusion of the 1971 Indo-Pak War, so when India and Pakistan both had a war over the issue of Bangladesh's future, there was an agreement that came out called the Shimla Accord. And the Shimla Agreement, or Shimla Accord, talks about how India and Pakistan will both resolve the Kashmir issue, which is a long-standing, I don't want to use the word dispute, but it's a long-standing conflict between those two countries. And essentially speaking, that the issue wouldn't be internationalized, and it would be an issue to be solved between India and Pakistan. It's a bilateral issue. And the thing is that American president after American president has recognized the Shimla Agreement and have always stated that Kashmir is an issue for India and Pakistan to resolve and deal with. Also, want to put it out there for the audience that may not be aware of it, but Kashmir was a princely state that was a very contentious issue in the subcontinent. Maharaja of Jammu and Kashmir decided to accede to India, join India at the conclusion of the partition of India. There were many princely states that were out of the Indian subcontinent. They were loyal to the British. One in particular, Jammu and Kashmir, decided to join India. The Pakistanis, which, their country came out of the British Empire, the British Raj in particular, they didn't agree with Kashmir going to India because Kashmir has a Muslim majority. And Pakistan was created out of this concept of two-nation theory where the Muslims of the subcontinent couldn't live with the Hindus, so that's why they wanted their own country, Pakistan. And they have never agreed that Kashmir is part of India, and they've been fighting India over this issue, and there have been 3 wars.
So I do want to add the caveat that Kashmir is a very sacred Hindu land as well, and the reason that there is a Muslim majority population there is due to the many exoduses that the Kashmiri Pandits have suffered, and it's been at a genocidal level. They still exist as internal refugees within India because the last exodus we saw was in 1990, which is not very old at all. It's a very recent phenomenon, and they were driven out of there. So Maharaja Hari Singh, when he acceded Jammu and Kashmir to India, was very well aware of its significance. And, Pakistan being a British creation is sure a historic fact, but Kashmir has been, the Shakti Peeth, the Sharda Peeth, and Takshila, the oldest one of the oldest universities, along with Nalanda, of Indian education, has been part of Kashmir. So it holds a very significant value in Hindu India as well. So there is that bit of history also.
Of course. And, Kashmir literally comes from Sanskrit, and Kashmir was created according to folklore and legends, from a Hindu rishi, and it had long been settled by Hindus and governed by Hindus for many thousands of years. But given just the context of today in the contemporary period, the point here is that both the Republic of India and the Republic of Pakistan do not agree with one another's position on this issue, and they fought 3 wars on it. And there have been issues in Kashmir in terms of how governance ought to be done. And as an American, it's not our war, it's not our conflict. And here we have this candidate that is musing about taking action, and we'll see. Let's continue.
What I would say. We are watching. The second piece of it is, there is a lot that needs to happen. First of all, under this administration, they have decimated the State Department. Decimated it. And so, as an example of that point, there is currently no ambassador to Pakistan. And that needs to be addressed. Because if the United States in any meaningful way will have any influence on what is happening in Kashmir, we need to have a representative who can be on the ground. You know, as it relates to the president's responsibility as commander-in-chief, you know, maybe because most of my career has been spent and focused on keeping people safe, I take that component of the job very seriously. And the commander-in-chief must always have as her highest priority our nation's security and the security of the homeland, but also leading with our values. And part of the values of who we are as a nation is that we speak out about human rights abuses, and where appropriate, we intervene. So that is how I would lead as commander-in-chief. With that as a value, that would be an important value with which I would lead, and immediately restock the State Department, understanding that one of the greatest strengths that we have then, and that the commander-in-chief has, is the ability to lead with a strong diplomatic corps that can then become involved in a way that allows us to be informed in our engagement. So that's how I would deal with it.
Thank you.
You know, Senator has been.
So the significance of what she said is that you get a very clear understanding of this person's worldview. This person essentially believes that there are human rights issues that ought to be addressed in this region, and that part of U.S. leadership is to, take care of those issues and to basically be the world's policeman or the world's nanny, however you want to see it, and to enforce those universal human rights issues, universal human rights standards. And again, it's through the context of commander-in-chief, which, is the leader of the military, of our armed forces. And we know we know of this rhetoric. We know what happened in Yugoslavia, completely destroyed, totally decimated in the name of human rights. We know what happened to Libya, again, in the name of human rights. We know what happened in Afghanistan in the name of human rights. We're supporting the Ukrainians, again, in the name of human rights. And on and on and on and on. And then, of course, is Iraq, which everyone knows about. And the idea that the commander-in-chief should intervene in this conflict zone is very, very irresponsible, reckless, dangerous. It goes into the heart of the candidates. It goes into the mind of the candidate. It should raise a lot of questions, right? Kashmir is not just contested by India and Pakistan, it's also contested by China. And all three countries are nuclear powers. And if the United States were to enter as a fourth nuclear power in this region, and in this context against India, you're going to have nuclear war under Kamala Harris. And now people have asked me, why should I care about a comment made in 2019, years past, one time? Well, because Kamala Harris continues to believe in this ideology. She talks about how international norms and standards need to be upheld, and she justifies that ideology and basis by talking about the need to support Ukraine. She continues to support this Ukraine war. People may or may not remember, but in 2022, in Munich, there was a conference, a security summit in February, where Kamala Harris was with Volodymyr Zelensky talking about the issues. And what was interesting is that in that meeting, Zelensky came out and talked about perhaps considering the use of, using nuclear weapons or gaining those nuclear weapons or essentially nuclearizing essentially in the region. He was very subtle in his words and rhetoric. People have speculated, journalists have speculated that perhaps Kamala Harris had a hand or influence in Zelensky's mindset and thinking, or egged him on. And then subsequent to Zelensky's words, The Russians, went into Ukraine, concerned about their borders. And so the point here is that, you've got a candidate, Kamala Harris, that is essentially for intervention, for the use of force, believes in, right is might, in the name of this moral good principle. And the other thing that should also be contextualized in all of this is that since those words have been used by Kamala Harris, she's never walked them back. She's never, ever retreated from what she said. And very consistent about a universal standard on human rights and the enforcement of that. Her government, essentially, Biden-Harris, is responsible for the enforcement of a lot of these liberal values on the world. Like we saw with Bangladesh, for example, where their government fell. And some have speculated that there was an American hand in this. And it's very interesting because the Biden-Harris government constantly criticized the government of Bangladesh for not having sufficient democratic values and following certain human rights rules and norms. And that government changed hands, and we have a lot of instability. And this administration, Biden-Harris, had been constantly attacking this government through the State Department, the Treasury Department, platforming opposition figures. And so we should be alarmed by this Kamala Harris. She has this interventionist streak to her, either through the use of the armed forces of America or through, State Department, or encouraging her allies to, provoke conflicts and to egg them on. And this should be discussed. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, Sagarika, like what your thinking is about the Biden-Harris foreign policy record.
Well, thank you. It's as you know, I've already written about this, and I do think it's extremely interventionist, and at least from an Indian standpoint, it speaks to a less stable neighborhood for us. So if Indo-Americans have retain a positive idea of their motherland, and they should also be as concerned about their policies, because they don't merely believe in it, they actually act on it, which can be seen with the Bangladesh situation now that they've banned their opposition, which would be the Awami League, which was the legitimate government in power. Sheikh Hasina never resigned. She only had to escape for her life to India. And so if people do care about their investments in India, if they care about India's growth at all, they should be aware that Kamala Harris's plans are not spoken as a means to merely pacify an interested reporter or an interested donor. It can well be put into action. So, and the US is the most militarily capable country on the planet. So I don't believe that something very nakedly couched as a threat can be taken without any substance. So maybe it was a misstep, maybe because she wasn't running for president at that time, but she's been on record saying this, so it's not something that one can take lightly. So sorry, go on.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to your thoughts. So the other thing that people should know about Kamala Harris, especially those of Indian origin, are those that are avid foreign policy watchers, or those that are, supportive of the Indo-US relationship. They need to also know some other things. Kamala Harris is on record for actually lecturing the Prime Minister of India on human rights to his face. And whatever you think about India's human rights record, the fact of the matter is, there's an old saying, which is, you don't, lecture your friends in public. You don't berate your friends in public. You do this in private out of respect for them, so that you don't denigrate them, make them look diminished, make them look smaller, make them look weaker. And this kind of pontificating is just not helpful, because what it does is it's a humiliation ritual, and it also causes angst in the population. It causes angst amongst world leaders that look to the United States as a friend and ally. I mean, if India is being cultivated as a strategic partner of the United States to check China, a common geopolitical foe, then surely it would stand to reason that we want to have this relationship as strong as possible, and not engage in these kind of practices where we're berating a head of government that we're trying to win, that we're trying to curry favor with. And then further to that, Kamala Harris's vice presidential pick is a guy called Tim Walz, and Tim Walz is a very, very interesting character, because in 2008, he, as a U.S. representative, actually voted against the Indo-U.S. nuclear deal, and that's something not talked about by anyone at all. Like, it's just not a thing. And he's also chided Modi on human rights. He even chided Manmohan Singh on human rights. And again, this goes to Kamala Harris, which is this is an individual that has some real issues with the Indo-U.S. relationship. I mean, one of the first choices here, as the top of the ticket of the Democratic Party, one of her major decisions is her running mate. She chose somebody who clearly very much has a record that is critical of India and critical of the incumbent Prime Minister Modi and even his predecessor. I also want to add a couple more points, just so that people understand this. Namely the audience. The other thing with Kamala Harris is, so there was an incident where there was a congresswoman, Jayapal, that's her last name.
Pramila Jayapal, yes.
Right. And she basically had essentially criticized the Indian government on the issue of Kashmir. And Kamala Harris, so what happened is that, if I'm not mistaken, this congresswoman wanted to visit India and also engage with the foreign minister of India. And he didn't want to engage with her.
Yes.
He
Yes.
boycotted this meeting.
Yes.
And Kamala Harris took offense to this and came to her side and was very resolute in her steadfast support of this congresswoman. And so, if the foreign minister of a country doesn't want to meet a member of Congress, they're not obligated to do so. And for the vice president of the United States at the time, Kamala Harris, for her to go out and berate this foreign minister, again, of a country that we're trying to win over as Americans, it's a little concerning. And it just speaks to that character, speaks to her political ideology, speaks to her beliefs. Again, and Indian American voters who are, looking at which candidates is going to be favorable to the interests of them. Indo-U.S. relationship is an issue. And, before anyone says, why do Indians care so much about this relationship with India? It's because they've got trade ties, financial ties, familial ties. And this relationship, should not be looked at as something bizarre, because it has been covered regularly that there are hundreds of thousands of Polish Americans in America. And Kamala Harris is on a campaign to win them over by saying, look, guys, Russia has invaded Ukraine, and historically speaking, the Poles have suffered under Russian occupation and rule. And so she's appealing to those Polish voters on the issue of the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. Then we know that President Trump received the support of numerous Muslim and Arab leaders who are all angry about what's going on in Gaza. We've got a lot of Jewish Americans who are concerned about what's going on in Israel and whether or not Israel will exist, given all of these forces challenging her. And politicians try to curry favor by two Jewish voters and Christian Zionist voters on the issue of Israel, America's relationship with Israel. And I'll just throw another example out there. The Cuban American community has always been concerned about what's going on in Cuba and what is the U.S. relationship with the communist regime there. And Cuba is a talking point amongst politicians. It's an issue that folks care about. And so I always ask people well, why can't Indo-US relations also be a concern to these Indian American voters? It should also matter too. And so it should be an election issue, and it should be something talked about and discussed about, and it should be normalized just like any other issue amongst the diaspora populations.
Well, no, that was put very coherently and comprehensively. I appreciate that. Thank you for laying it out. So Kamala Harris is, because I specify that India and Pakistan are hostile nations, I'm just going to be blunt and say that Kamala Harris is in support of Pakistan. That means she is against India. We've seen the Democrats be on that side for a long, long time, regardless of the few signals that they send across once in a while, just picturing themselves eating gulab jamun or jalebi. But, their actions and especially the ambassador that they've chosen to represent their country in India has been very clear that they do side with Pakistan. And, well, it has geopolitical implications, but let's go back to, your work with the Trump campaign and working with Hindus to support Trump, and talk about other issues that affect them as Americans. You mentioned the economy. So how would you describe Trump's policies as benefiting them economically?
Yeah, so under President Trump, America had record GDP growth near 3%, 3%, and it was quite a great economy, and you had a lot of Indian Americans doing pretty well. So they're one of the top income earners in the country. Something between $119,000 to $123,000 annum in the household. It's very, very impressive, and they did very great. Did very well in the IT, finance, healthcare sectors, and except for COVID, it was quite great. And the reason for that is because under the Trump administration, there was a concerted effort to reduce red tape, to support measures that deregulated elements of the economy. Penalties, fines were reduced. There was more simplification of, filing forms for businesses, your taxes. There were a tremendous amount of tax cuts across the board for all Americans. And Indian Americans pay some of the highest tax rates in the country, and they did quite well under President Trump. And the thing that President Trump is campaigning on is the restoration of that economy, and he wants to, unleash the actual energy that exists in the country. So he wants to drill the oil. He wants to do fracking. He wants to essentially walk away from some of this radical, aggressive decarbonization agenda. He's supportive of nuclear power. He's supportive of a nice mixture of different renewable energy sources. And he wants government to get out of the way of a lot of this red tape and regulation that inhibits and impacts energy companies from, meaningfully exploiting the earth for the purposes of powering America's economy and running the engine, essentially. There's also the fact that President Trump is a strong advocate of private health care and allowing for choice in health care. Indian Americans are still scratching their head and wondering, what does Kamala Harris have to say on this healthcare matter? She has a record of wanting to abolish private healthcare, have a government take over, and essentially having the government take over the entire industry. Now, she says that she no longer believes in this. Who knows, given her long, sterling record of being a lefty. People just don't think Kamala is a very genuine, sincere politician. They just see that she decided to run for president and has U-turned every single position. Like, she was opposed to fracking. She's now for it, apparently. She talked about, supporting all kinds of restrictions on people's gun rights. And now supposedly she's not in favor of these restrictions much anymore. So, the economic plan that Kamala Harris has proposed, it talks about, yes, some tax cuts for small businesses, tax cuts for everyday ordinary Americans. But then there's tax hikes on individuals and corporations who are wealthy. And, there's this classic debate in America about redistribution in economics. There's a whole debate about, should the rich pay more? But there's not enough of a conversation about how the wealthy pays the bulk of the tax load in the country. And there's not enough of a conversation about how the wealthy can literally flee the country and go to low tax jurisdictions.
They do. And they set up their organizations abroad, right, for tax reasons.
Absolutely. And the thing is that if America wants to be the innovator of the world, she needs to think about how she's going to retain this top-tier talent and how she's going to have competitive tax rates. And, one thing I got to say to your audience in India, one thing I like about Prime Minister Modi is that he understands the need to be pro-business. He sees the benefit of that. He sees the need to keep taxes competitive so that, industry can set up shop. He also appreciates the fact that red tape is a problem. When he was Chief Minister of Gujarat, he really, really went to town on going after all of that red tape. And I really like his model of economic growth and success. India's GDP has grown quite a lot under his leadership. And it's something that I know President Trump admires very much because he frequently commends Prime Minister Modi for his business approach and really likes what he does for industry. But yeah, these are the sort of things that, people are talking about. Kamala Harris is also for the PRO Act, which would essentially have unions, developing and getting together and getting the workplaces to go into that direction where they're having to unionize. And I've spoken to a lot of the the Patels, for example, Gujarati community that own a lot of the hotels. They're concerned about what's going to happen if these hotel workers get the power to unionize and start clamoring for more and more benefits. Now, obviously, no one's against empowering workers, but the issue is when the margins are so small and there's so much competition, how can you build a business? How can you sustain a business? Mm-hmm. And when everything's so expensive, can you afford to have more costs? And these Democrats are very, very unconcerned about these small business owners and what it's going to mean for them. Another thing I have to mention that is a concern to Indian Americans is that Kamala Harris has talked about taxing unrealized gains. And that's very significant because though the wealthy would be paying for these taxes on unrealized gains, what's going to happen is they're going to end up selling the shares, these companies.
Exactly.
The owners are going to sell the shares to pay for the tax, and that's going to bring about a devaluation of the stocks. And that's ultimately going to hurt the middle class who put their college savings into these stocks, their healthcare, their children's tuitions into these shares. They put their retirement savings into these stocks so that it can appreciate and grow, and so on and so forth. And so any new taxes that would come would trickle down and hurt the middle class. And Indian Americans are very wise to this because they're very well educated, and they see the arithmetic, they see the numbers, they know the math, they know how it works, they know how companies in the past have passed the costs down to the consumer. So, for example, when Obamacare became a thing and companies were required to cover people, and health insurance was a priority in that everyone had to get coverage, we saw premiums go up, and that wasn't a good thing, because and also, more importantly, to the point, not only so were these companies required to give more coverage, there's also that element where people with pre-existing conditions also had to be covered, and that also contributed to the rise of costs. And so, when you're trying to do a social good like covering people with pre-existing conditions, what you end up doing is you end up having the burden spread somewhere else, that comes from these costs, and these companies put it on the consumer, and we had these rates go up, and it wasn't exactly a great thing. I should clarify one thing. So, like, these companies having to cover people, that didn't contribute necessarily to these cost increases. I just want to correct that for the record. What I meant to say was that the issue of covering people with pre-existing conditions, that is what drove up those rates. And my point simply is that you do something in the name of a social good and ends up hurting people in the end. But yeah, these are some of the factors that voters are talking about, yeah.
All right. Well, it's. I know I said that we'd do a short conversation and keep it focused, but I think we've covered quite a lot of ground on, with regards to economics that we can expect under both possible presidents and the concerns that Indian Americans will have with each, but especially with Kamala, because she and the Democrat government have consistently sided with Pakistan over the last couple of decades. So, I mean, of course, for majority of history as well, but especially we see the effects over the last couple of decades. The rhetoric also has been ramped up. But thank you so much for joining me today. It's been really good talking to you and getting the ground details about the upcoming elections. Good luck for your campaign.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
All right.
Thank you so much, Segrika. Nice talking to you.
Thank you. Bye.